Over the last 24 hours, there has been a flood of new Nintendo Switch 2 leaks, information, and rumors floating around online that we have to unpack and get on the same page with, because there's a couple different stories we have to go over, one of which having to do with the controllers for this next-gen Nintendo console and some backwards compatibility with one of our favorite current controllers for the Switch, although with an asterisk that I want to bring up to you guys. And this story has me very excited because, one, it's coming from a very reliable source that accurately reported upon some detailed information for the Switch OLED ahead of its official reveal, and two, because it indicates that one of the big headaches with the current Nintendo Switch family of systems is probably finally solved for, and I would hope Nintendo would figure this out ahead of their next gen console's launch. Then the story number two we're going to talk about actually has to do with some more manufacturing details, specifically who's making a lot of the components within the Switch 2, and potentially knowing for sure now that rumored chip, the T239, is indeed what we should expect in this thing. And the interesting part about this one, which I'm going to call more of a rumor than a leak, is that it floats out the idea that there's still the potential for a 2024 launch, although I'm not on board with that part of the story, but it doesn't mean it's all bad info, and it's actually coming from a business-focused website by the name of Business Korea, so we're going to get on the same page with all of the new info. Before we do, make sure you like, subscribe, and turn on your bell notification to join Sunbird Nation if you're new here. And I want to first kick it off with story number one that does have to do with the fact that we might now know some specifics around the controller and controller options for Nintendo Switch 2, as we are first going to hop over to VGC and read through their detailed typed up article together, which says Switch 2 reportedly has magnetic Joy-Cons, might not support existing ones. It's also claimed that the current Pro controller will be compatible with Nintendo's new console. Long-running Spanish video games website Vandel claims to have received information about the console from sources at peripheral manufacturers. According to the site, Switch 2's Joy-Con controllers will attach to the console magnetically, as current Joy-Cons connect to the Switch with a rail system. It's unclear if they'll be forward compatible with the new console. The existing Nintendo Switch Pro controller will work with Switch 2, it's claimed. It's worth noting that prior to Switch OLED's reveal in 2021, Vandel accurately reported on some of the console's features, such as the inclusion of a new stand and Ethernet port. VGC had reported in February that Nintendo had internally delayed the launch of its next-gen console from this year to early 2025. One publishing source suggested the delay was so that it could prepare stronger first-party software for the console, while others have claimed the move was made to avoid potential hardware supply issues. Okay, so first unpacking the idea that we will have magnetic Joy-Cons as part of this next-generation console, that is a very interesting claim, because when you hear magnets, you think ease of them clicking in, but what you don't necessarily think is stability in terms of if you were to shake the console violently or basically try to bend it a little bit, you know, just if you're in an intense gaming moment and you grip it too tight, would you have to be afraid of these Joy-Cons just being able to easily be detached from a magnet system and you could just accidentally pull them off? I think that Nintendo, if they are going with this magnet system, and I do tend to believe this report, that they will have a more thought out solution than that. I can kind of picture the magnet system being something that gets the Joy-Cons onto the system initially, and then there's some kind of lock system in place, whether that's done through hardware or software, I don't know, but I could imagine it detecting the Joy-Con and having a lock that takes place after that, whether that's a switch on the back that you have to physically do to lock them in, or if it's something that's software related and you have to tell your Switch via the software when you actually want to pull your Joy-Cons off via the magnet system and it releases that hold. I can picture them really doing something a little bit more stable and sturdy than just having magnets that could easily, in theory, if you gripped the console too hard, potentially accidentally come off. I don't think Nintendo's going to go with something like that. I still think it will have some kind of lock mechanism to it, or lock into place, that makes it very sturdy, but it's going to solve for the slide on rail issues that some people run into. I haven't run into really any issues with it, although I have seen some Switches that are pretty beat up and it does look like their Joy-Cons are almost bent from not going on the rails correctly anymore, especially if younger children are using this thing. Like, obviously Nintendo's going to want to solve for some of those components that can wear down over time, and the rail system is definitely one of those. The other very cool thing is, of course, you would have to naturally expect that if Nintendo is indeed reworking the Joy-Cons from the ground up, and this site also claims that these are larger than the initial Joy-Cons that we have today, well, then at that point you would assume Joy-Con drift will finally be a thing of the past, and that has plagued myself and many other Switch owners over all the years of owning these consoles. Like, it just happens one day where your stick starts drifting for no reason, and sometimes you can get some additional life out of it. Sometimes you just got to go break down and either send them to Nintendo or buy an entire new pair for $79 here in the US, which is astronomically high. So that's all good news. And there was also an interesting claim from Vandal that states that they were allowed to feel this Nintendo Switch in an opaque box, meaning like they could feel it for the dimensions and get an idea of what it felt like in their hands, but they could not see the console. And that begs the question, what exactly is Nintendo hiding from them that they absolutely will not even let anyone get eyes on their next generation console ahead of its launch? It's definitely one of those tight-lipped moves that makes you think, is there something else on this console that we're not thinking of? Cameras, different type of sensors, who knows what they may have built into it, but it's very interesting to me that they didn't want them to see a prototype version of it and rather just had them put their hands into a box to feel what it felt like. And that's what these reports are going off of. And I'm sure they explain the magnet system for the Joy-Cons. This is all done so accessory manufacturers can, in theory, get ready to start shipping out supplies and accessories for the next generation hardware launch for Nintendo. Now, the other claim that was in this article was that the Nintendo Switch Pro controllers are indeed compatible with the next gen console. And while on the surface, that's just great news across the board, and it also likely heavily implies that backwards compatibility with our current Switch libraries will be a thing, there is also a thought that popped into my head where we can't necessarily write home and say that the Switch Pro controllers will indeed be 100% compatible with all of the new Switch 2 games, because if you are a Sony console owner, aka you went from the PS4 to the PS5, you might remember that you can sync up your PS4 controllers to a PS5, but PS5 exclusive games cannot be played with that PS4 controller. Now granted, Sony did do a big overhaul with haptic feedback and things within their controller and the adaptive triggers and different customization options within games, and they had developers program PS5 exclusive games with those new controller settings. Nintendo might not do something like that, but just the claim that these are compatible in terms of being able to be synced up to the Nintendo Switch 2 doesn't necessarily mean that you can play every single game from Nintendo Switch 2 with these controllers. So just keep that in the back of your mind. I could kind of picture Nintendo doing something like that, but on the surface, assuming that we can connect our Pro controllers and even maybe our Joy-Cons wirelessly to the console with not being able to slide them on, you're talking about a wide variety of multiplayer support out of the gate without having to go through and buy very expensive brand new first-party Nintendo controllers. So that part's great. So all of that has me very excited for the console so far, but we do have to talk about what I would consider to be the less credible leak or rumor going around online, but it does make some interesting claims. And to get on the same page with that, we need to hop over to My Nintendo News, where the following article outlines Business Korea Switch 2 could launch 2024 and uses Samsung components. Another Switch 2 leak has emerged, and this time it is from Business Korea. The Korean publication claims a number of things, including that we could be seeing the Switch 2 at the end of this year after all. The site also says that Samsung is the main component provider for the platform, and the system will use NVIDIA's Tegra T239 chip, which means it would be similar in power to Sony's PlayStation 4 with some ray tracing capabilities and DLSS. The important points read as follows: Switch 2 is expected to launch as early as the second half of this year. Suppliers have reportedly reached a considerable degree of agreement for initial production contracts. Samsung Foundry will fabricate the SoC on Samsung's 7LPH process node. Samsung will provide the NAND storage for both the cartridges and internal memory. Samsung has overcome competitors from China to be the display supplier. The Nintendo Switch 2 is expected to launch as early as the second half of this year. Significant contracts have already been negotiated in the component industry for initial production. Tegra T239 produced by Samsung Foundry, 7LPH display Samsung OLED, with the exception that LCD models may be released first using Sharp display. So as mentioned, I'm putting a little bit less stock in the second round of information, although a lot of those Samsung components would line up with some of the recent things we've been talking about on the channel, such as the NAND flash memory for the cartridges for Nintendo Switch 2, and that looks way more official than this does. The only reason I call this into more question is, one, that 2024 launch timeline really goes against the grain with just about everybody else that's reporting on this thing that has developers that are being told early 2025. Granted, they are saying it could launch as early as late 2024. One, I feel like we would at least know about the console by now if it was coming out this holiday season. And two, this could just be a guess of the timeline of launch for manufacturing, because they are supposed to ramp up their manufacturing in significant ways right now due to these contracts all being signed. But it doesn't necessarily mean that that's when Nintendo's going to launch the console, as one of the reported reasons that Nintendo could be waiting to launch until early 2025 has to do with the claim that they don't want a scalping situation on their hands. They don't want people turning around and selling the this console for double, triple price on eBay, and they want consumers to have a fair shot at buying it at MSRP. The other interesting claim is that it would be a Samsung OLED panel, which is primarily, almost exclusively, I think, what Samsung makes now, but we have had multiple reports that it's supposedly a LCD display, so that doesn't exactly line up. But until you start production, you could make last minute contract negotiations and potentially shift it to an 8-inch OLED display, which I would clearly love to see them launch with. But are we going to get a version 1 of this thing for 2 years, and then the version 2 does have an OLED display? Like, that wouldn't exactly be the best thing either if Nintendo turns around and launches an OLED version 2 quick after. But nonetheless, between now accessory manufacturers and having all of these manufacturing reports from Samsung winning contracts and getting things ready to go for mass production, well, that's a lot of big Nintendo Switch 2 claims, and now we just need Nintendo to weigh in on all of this. I am hopeful that that May 7th date gives us some kind of hint or indication when they do hold their next investor briefing, and clearly we will be covering that, any official notable news here on the channel, so get subscribed for that. Let me know in the comments down below what you guys make of all of this. Do you think that we are any closer to Nintendo Switch 2 entering mass production? And do you think that the magnet system for the Joy-Cons is a go? Do you think that the Pro controller being compatible is a go? Do you think that it's all games, or will Nintendo try something a little shifty like what PlayStation did with PS4 to PS5 controllers, where it's not compatible with all of the next gen games but only the backwards compatible ones? And are you holding out any hope that Nintendo officially confirms this thing at their May 7th investor briefing? Do you think it'll be around that loose timeline, or when is the first time we actually think, in your opinion, we will see Nintendo finally comment on this? So thanks so much for watching the video. Go watch yesterday's video next if you haven't already, and I will see you guys next time.